The rain pounded against his apartment window as Leo Finch inspected the contents of his mail pile. Among the usual bills and advertisements, one envelope stood out, plain white, with no return address, the paper thick and slightly crinkled as if it had been handled too many times. He'd been a locksmith for 20 years, and though he was used to unlocking the secrets of homes and safes, this letter sent an odd chill down his spine. He hesitated, but curiosity won. He slid his finger under the flap, carefully tearing it open, and pulled out a single, gleaming brass key attached to a small slip of paper. The paper simply read, "The Greenlight Motel, room 207. Leo frowned. The Greenlight Motel was an old place on the edge of town, barely scraping by, and home to more than a few shady types. He'd had his fair share of late-night calls there to help people who'd locked themselves out in less-than-ideal situations. But why had someone sent him a key to it? And why room 207? The key felt warm in his hand, as though recently used. It was an unusual design, vintage, with a peculiar marking on the head that looked like a small engraved circle with a line through it. It didn't match any of the motel's current keys, which he would recognize immediately. Curiosity drove him to the motel that same night, the rain still pouring down as he arrived. The Greenlight stood as he remembered, a tired building with peeling paint and dim neon lights flickering outside, casting an eerie green glow over the parking lot. He walked through the puddles, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The desk clerk barely looked up as he entered, giving him an uninterested nod. Leo made his way down the narrow corridor, his heart beating louder with each step. He didn't know what he expected to find, but something in his gut told him this was more than a prank. He reached room 207 and, with a shaky breath, inserted the key. It turned smoothly, and the door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty room. He flicked on the light, and what he saw made his blood run cold. In the center of the room, the carpet was stained dark, and scattered around were pieces of broken glass and what looked like hastily discarded personal belongings. A wristwatch, a torn photograph, and a notebook lying open. The air was thick with the smell of mold and something else, something metallic. He walked in slowly, his eyes drawn to the notebook. As he picked it up, he saw that only one phrase was written repeatedly on the first page, in shaky handwriting. "He will come for you." Leo's hands shook as he set it down, his mind racing. The room felt suffocating, as though he wasn't alone. He turned, prepared to leave, but froze in the doorway. A figure stood at the end of the hall, barely visible in the dim light. Whoever it was, they watched him in silence, motionless. Leo's instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet felt glued to the ground. He blinked, and just as suddenly as the figure had appeared, it was gone. He stumbled out of the room, his heart pounding, and fled the motel. Once back in his car, he stared down at the key in his hand, his mind still spinning. As he pulled himself together, another thought struck him. Why him? And who had sent the key? He had barely begun to calm down when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his blood ran cold. It was a text from an unknown number, containing only a single line. "Expect another key soon." Leo barely slept that night, haunted by the memory of the eerie figure at the motel and the unsettling message in the notebook. The phrase, "He will come for you," replayed in his mind as he drifted in and out of fitful dreams. Each time he woke, he would instinctively reach for the key, which now felt like a dark talisman, pulling him into something he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. The next morning, he tried to shake off the unease. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe it was all a strange prank by someone with a twisted sense of humor. But deep down, he knew better. As he prepared for his day, a knock on his door made him jump. He took a breath, willing himself to relax, and opened it. His heart sank when he saw what lay on his doorstep. Another plain white envelope identical to the first. No address, no stamp. Whoever was sending these was close by. With trembling hands, he tore open the envelope, and sure enough, another key fell into his hand. This one was silver, smaller, and attached to a tag that read, "The Crescent Park, Bench 12. The park was a quiet place on the edge of town, usually filled with families during the day, but eerily deserted at night. Leo's mind raced. He wanted to ignore it, to throw the key away and forget this whole ordeal. But something about it drew him in, a compulsion he couldn't shake. As evening fell, he found himself walking toward Crescent Park. The sinking sun cast long shadows, and the trees rustled in the cool breeze, adding to the unnerving quiet. Bench 12 was near the park's center, close to a small overgrown pond where he had played as a child. When he arrived, he saw that the bench wasn't empty. Sitting there was a small locked box with intricate carvings on the top, clearly old and weathered by time. The carvings looked familiar, and as he traced his fingers over the design, he realized it matched the symbol on the first key, the small circle with a line through it. He inserted the new silver key, and with a soft click, the box opened. Inside was a neatly folded piece of paper and an old photograph yellowed with age. The photograph showed a young woman he didn't recognize, standing in front of a house that seemed oddly familiar. She wore an expression of quiet fear, as though she knew she was being watched. He unfolded the note, and his heart skipped a beat as he read, "Find her before I do." Confusion mixed with a growing sense of dread. Who was this woman? Why was he being told to find her? And who exactly was this I? The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He looked around, scanning the park, but saw nothing unusual. Yet he felt a presence, something watching him from the shadows, hidden just out of sight. A rustling sound behind him made him turn. The bushes shifted, but no one appeared. His grip tightened on the box, and he took a step back, the weight of the photograph and the note bearing down on him. As he started to leave, his phone buzzed again. It was another text from the unknown number. "Time is running out, Leo. Expect another key soon." Leo couldn't shake the image of the woman from his mind. Her face, frozen in fear, seemed to follow him wherever he went. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, the photograph laid out in front of him, along with the 2 keys he had received. He felt like he was staring at pieces of a puzzle with no clear picture in sight. He decided he needed to figure out who the woman was, and why she seemed to be at the center of whatever game he had been drawn into. The house in the background of the photograph looked familiar, a traditional 2-story with ivy creeping up the walls. He was certain he'd seen it somewhere in town, maybe even passed by it during his usual rounds. Determined, he scanned through the town's property records online, cross-referencing the style and details of the house, until he finally found a match. It was a house on the old west side of town, known for its eerie historic homes. The address was 42 Willow Street, and as far as he could tell, it had been vacant for years. No one had lived there since the previous owner had disappeared under strange circumstances, a detail that sent a chill down his spine. He felt as though he was delving into a mystery that was much older and much darker than he had anticipated. The next morning he made his way to Willow Street, clutching the photograph tightly as he drove through town. He parked a block away, hoping to go unnoticed. The house loomed ahead, shrouded in silence, its windows dark and lifeless. He approached cautiously, finding the door unlocked. It creaked open, revealing an interior coated in dust and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and an unsettling silence filled every corner. He took a few steps inside, his footsteps echoing in the hollow space. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, and remnants of the previous owner's life lay scattered across the floor. A broken picture frame, an overturned chair, a dusty old lamp. He half expected the woman from the photograph to step out of the shadows. As he moved further into the house, he came across a small room that seemed different from the others. It was cleaner, as though someone had been there recently, and on the small table in the center of the room was a third key. This one small and copper-colored, with a tag that simply read, "The Basement." A sense of dread filled him as he picked up the key, feeling its cold weight in his hand. He scanned the room and noticed a door tucked away in the corner, slightly ajar. Beyond it, a narrow staircase led down into darkness. With a deep breath, he descended into the basement, the air growing colder with each step. The light from his phone barely pierced the shadows, illuminating shelves stacked with old boxes and forgotten belongings. In the center of the room, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. An old rusted bed frame with chains attached to each corner, lying abandoned on the floor. He moved closer, his pulse racing. Something was carved into the floor beside the bed, words scratched hastily, as if by someone desperate to escape. "Don't let him find me." As he stared at the words, a sudden noise behind him made him whirl around. A dark figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light. Leo's heart pounded as he took a step back, feeling trapped, his only escape blocked. The figure didn't move, watching him with a chilling intensity. Leo felt paralyzed, his mind racing. Then, without a word, the figure turned and vanished up the stairs, leaving him alone in the cold, silent basement. He scrambled out of the house, his breath ragged, his mind flooded with questions. Who was the figure, and who was the woman who had begged not to be found? Just as he reached his car, his phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "You're close, Leo. Expect another key soon." Leo's hands trembled as he clutched his phone, rereading the message from the unknown number. "You're close, Leo. Expect another key soon." He felt the familiar dread settle into the pit of his stomach. But there was also something else, a grim determination. He was being led on a trail, but each step brought him closer to the truth. The next morning, Leo sat in his apartment, the photograph and keys spread before him on his coffee table. The words scratched into the basement floor haunted him. "Don't let him find me." Whoever the woman was, she had been terrified of someone. A person Leo was starting to suspect might be the one orchestrating these strange deliveries. The following day, he tried to return to his locksmith business, hoping a day of routine work might clear his mind. But the feeling of being watched never left him, and with every turn, he half expected to find the shadowy figure from the basement waiting for him. It wasn't long before he returned to his apartment, unable to focus, nerves on edge. He found another envelope waiting for him. Unlike the previous ones, this one was black, its surface rough, like sandpaper. Inside was a small silver key attached to a tag that read, "Evergrove Cemetery, Plot 34. Leo felt his stomach twist. He knew the cemetery. It lay on the outskirts of town, a place where forgotten graves and weathered tombstones stood in silence. It was not somewhere people went, especially at night. As dusk settled, Leo made his way to the cemetery, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the rows of tombstones. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth. and an unsettling silence filled the grounds. Plot 34 was near the back, hidden from view by a cluster of towering trees. When he arrived, he found a small unmarked headstone. At its base lay a single, wilted flower, as though someone had left it there long ago. Beside the flower, half buried in the dirt, was a small black leather-bound notebook. Its pages were yellowed with age, and as he picked it up, he felt the weight of something far darker than he'd anticipated. He opened it to the first page, where a name was scrawled in neat, slanting handwriting. Elena Hart. The name struck a chord. He had heard it whispered around town, a woman who had gone missing years ago under mysterious circumstances. Her case had gone cold, and the few who remembered her spoke of her with a mix of sadness and unease. But that was years before Leo had come to Evergrove. He flipped through the pages, each one filled with detailed notes in Elena's handwriting. She wrote about feeling watched, about hearing footsteps behind her at night, about seeing shadows lurking just beyond her line of sight. Her last few entries were more frantic, as though she had been spiraling into fear and paranoia. The final entry made his heart pound. He found me. I don't have much time. Whoever finds this, please, don't let him keep you in the dark. He collects secrets, and he won't stop until he's taken mine. Until he's taken yours. As Leo closed the notebook, he felt the weight of her words settle over him. The shadow collector, this figure who haunted Evergrove, who manipulated people with fear, had taken Elena, and now he was trying to pull Leo into the same darkness. A twig snapped behind him, and Leo spun around. At the edge of the cemetery stood a tall figure, shrouded in shadow, watching him in silence. Leo's chest tightened as he felt the figure's gaze, cold and unrelenting, and then just as suddenly, the figure was gone. Leo backed away, his heart pounding, and stumbled out of the cemetery. He'd gone too far to turn back now. Whoever or whatever the shadow collector was, he was determined to find out. This was more than a game, more than a string of random keys. It was a web of secrets, and he was entangled in it. As he reached his car, his phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Expect one last key, Leo. It's time to learn the truth. Leo's hands shook as he read the message. Expect one last key, Leo. It's time to learn the truth. The shadow collector's words hung heavy in his mind, echoing as he drove home through the quiet streets of Evergrove. Back in his apartment, he spread the items on his table, the photograph of the woman, Elena Hart's notebook, and the 4 keys he had received so far. Each one had led him deeper into the mystery, but also closer to something dark, something that had claimed Elena and now had him firmly in its grasp. It didn't take long for the final envelope to arrive. As if on cue, a knock sounded at his door. He froze, his heart pounding, before cautiously approaching. On his doorstep lay a final envelope, black and foreboding like the previous one. Inside was a key, unlike any he'd seen before. It was old, tarnished and engraved with strange symbols that he couldn't decipher. There was no note, no message, only an address scribbled on a tag attached to the key. 14 Crossway Lane. Leo knew the place. It was an abandoned house on the edge of town, a place children dared each other to go near but never did. Rumors swirled about it, whispers of strange sightings, shadows that moved on their own, and voices heard in the dead of night. It was a house steeped in Evergrove's darkest legends. He arrived at Crossway Lane, under the cover of night, the house looming before him like a relic of some forgotten nightmare. Its windows were shattered, and ivy had crept up the crumbling brick walls, twisting around the building as if to contain whatever was inside. With a deep breath, Leo walked up to the door and inserted the final key. It turned with an eerie ease, and the door swung open, revealing a dark, dusty foyer. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing through the empty house. Shadows flickered across the walls, and as he moved deeper into the building, he felt the oppressive weight of the place settle over him. It was as though the walls themselves were watching him. In the center of the room stood an old chair, and on it was a single item, a small rusted lockbox with the same symbol that had been engraved on the keys. This was it, the heart of the mystery. He opened the box, his fingers trembling, and found a single sheet of paper. The note read, "You kept my secret, Leo. Now let's see if you can keep your own." As he stared at the message, his mind raced. He felt a presence behind him, a shadow shifting, growing, until it loomed over him. Slowly, he turned, and his breath caught in his throat. The figure from the cemetery, the motel, and the basement stood before him. Its face was obscured, as though made of shadows that shifted and writhed, but in its eyes he saw something chillingly familiar: knowledge, power, and a deep, unrelenting hunger. It spoke in a voice that echoed from every dark corner of the room, a voice that sent chills down his spine. "I am the collector, Leo. I keep the secrets that people bury. Elena tried to hide from me, just as you have, but secrets have a way of coming to light, especially when they're dark." Leo backed away, his mind racing. "Why me?" he managed to ask, his voice barely more than a whisper. The collector took a step closer, shadows swirling around it. "Because you are a keeper of secrets, just like I am. I know what you hide, Leo. I know the things you've locked away, the guilt that festers inside you. And now, it's time to pay the price." Images flashed through Leo's mind, choices he had made, people he had wronged, and the secrets he'd hidden even from himself. He felt the weight of them pressing down, suffocating him, as though the shadow collector was drawing his own darkness out of him. As he struggled against the pull, he remembered Elena's words from her journal. "Don't let him keep you in the dark." Summoning the last of his strength, Leo forced himself to confront the memories he'd buried, the guilt, the regret, and the pain he had tried so hard to forget. As he acknowledged each one, he felt the shadow's hold weaken, its power fading with each revelation. The collector let out a guttural, furious scream as it began to dissolve, its form unraveling into wisps of darkness that dissipated into the air. The shadows retreated, leaving Leo alone in the room, his heart pounding and his mind reeling. He stumbled out of the house, feeling lighter than he had in years. The collector was gone, its power over him broken. But he knew the truth. It wasn't the keys or the places that had held him captive. It was his own secrets, his own darkness, that had given the collector its power. As he walked away from Crossway Lane, he felt a strange sense of peace. The shadows in Evergrove would always be there, lurking in the quiet corners of the town. But he was free of them now, or at least he hoped he was. Weeks passed, and life in Evergrove slipped back into its usual rhythm, as if the strange events with the shadow collector had been nothing but a passing storm. But Leo knew better. He carried the memories, the weight of his encounter, like an invisible scar. He felt different, lighter, yes, but also changed, as though he had crossed a threshold that he couldn't uncross. One evening, while cleaning out his workshop, he stumbled upon an old unused keyring tucked away in a drawer. He held it in his hand, the metal cool and reassuring. Keys were meant to open doors, to reveal or conceal, To secure or release, they held secrets. But he was done with secrets. He drove back to Crossway Lane under the cover of dusk, a time when shadows stretched long and the world seemed to hold its breath. The house loomed, silent and still, a relic of dark memories. He approached the door and, without hesitation, left the empty keyring on the stoop, a silent offering, a marker of the secrets he'd shed. The wind rustled, whispering through the trees as he turned and walked back to his car. He didn't look back. Whatever ghosts lingered in that house, whatever dark presence might yet roam Evergrove, they were no longer his burden to bear. He was free. As he drove away, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in shadow. But this time, Leo knew that the darkness was just that, shadows. No more, no less. And in the quiet of the night, the shadows settled once again, waiting patiently, as they always did, for someone else to come along and unlock their secrets.